Okay, this is a video key for learning Target 2 practice, so I can write a fraction in decimal form, including repeating decimals. So for the first one, 1/8, remember that fractions are just division problems, so we're doing 1 divided by 8. We could try to get this to be a fraction with 100 in the denominator, but 8 is not a factor of 100, so we're not going to be able to do it that way. Okay, so we need to say how many times does 8 go into 1, and it doesn't, so that's our 0. So we know this number is between 0 and 1 because our numerator is less than the denominator. So we know we're going into the decimals. So then we put our 0 and say how many times does 8 go into 10, and that's once. So we subtract 8 to see how many we have left over. We still need to divide. We got to drop down another 0. So 8 goes into 20 twice. So 8 times 2 gets us up to 16, so we still have 4 left over. We're going to drop another 0 to keep dividing. How many times does 8 go into 40? That's 5 times. So we take off 40 and then we're left with nothing. So now we can be done. So our final answer is 125 thousandths, 0.125. For number 2, we're going to do the same thing, but luckily we can do it a different way this time. If we can get the denominator to be 100, then we have an easier time writing it as a fraction. So since 20 is a factor of 100, I can multiply the denominator and numerator by the same thing to get an equivalent fraction. So I know that 20 times 5 will get me up to 100, so I have to multiply the numerator by 100 as well. So 11 times 5 gives me 55. So to write this as a decimal, we need to read the number. So that's 55 hundredths. So write that as a decimal, 55 hundredths. 55 because that's the numbers to the right of the decimal, and it's hundredths because that's the smallest place value. So this is 55 hundredths. We can do it by dividing as well, dividing 11 by 20, and it goes pretty quick. So 20 does not go into 11, so we'll put a 0, and now we're into the decimals, so 110. So I know that 5 times 20 will get me up to 100, so 5's the most it can go in. So we'll subtract 100 to see what we have left over to still divide. You got to bring down a 0, and now we say how many times does 20 go into 100? That's 5 times, and that goes in evenly. So then we have a remainder of 0, so we're done. So 55 hundredths, or 0.55, is our final answer for number 2. For number 3, we have a mixed number, so 5 and 8/25. So since we have a mixed number, I know my final answer is going to have a whole number of 5. So you don't have to worry about the 5, as long as you know that the final answer is going to have 5 as your whole part of the number. So now 8/25, again, this one's a nice one. I can get this denominator be equal to 100 by multiplying by 4. So what you do to the numerator, you have to do to the denominator to get an equivalent fraction. So 25 times 4 will give us that 100, and 8 times 4 gives us 32. So read that number, 32 hundredths. So that's 0.32 as a decimal. But since my number was 5 and 8/25, my number's 5 and 32 hundredths. So your final answer would be 5.32. Again, we can do this with long division, so 8 divided by 25. 25 does not go into 8, so then we have to go into our decimals. 25 goes into 80 3 times. That gets us up to 75, so we subtract 75 to see how much we still need to divide. Drop another 0. 25 goes into 50 twice, so I'm going to put it over here. So we'll subtract 50, and we're left with nothing, so we can stop. So again, we get 32 hundredths, or 0.32, and again, since we know it was a mixed number, we know our whole part is 5, so it's 5 and 32 hundredths as your final answer. Moving on, number 4, 9/16. So this time we don't have it as easy. There is no number multiplied by 16, no whole number anyway, that will give us 100. So we know that this is not a factor of 100, so we must do long division. So we're going to do 9 divided by 16. 16 does not go into 9, so we're in the decimals, which makes sense because the numerator is smaller than the denominator. So let's see how many times does 16 go into 90. If you're not sure, you might need to do some math off to the side, and that's perfectly fine. So if we count by 16s, I know 16 plus 16 gives me 32. And I can go some more. And now if I double 32, if I add 32 again, that's 2 more 16s, gets me up to 64. If I add 32 more, that'll put me over 90. So I'm going to just add 16 one more time to get 80. Now we got to make sure we know how many 16s we used. We used 2 here, 2 more here, and then 1 here. So it went in 5 times. So 16 times 5 gave us that 80, and we'll see how much we have left over. And we got to keep dividing, so we bring down our 0 first. So since 16 times 5 gave us 80, if I add one more 16 there, that'll give me up to 96. So that would be 6 times. So if we subtract 96, we get 4. Bring that down. Now how many times does 16 go into 40? Well, I know 16 times 2 gets me up to 32. So subtract 32 and I get 8. I'm going to bring it up here. So we have to bring down another 0, so now we'll be going into 80. And we know that that went in evenly. And that was 2, 4, 5, 16s gave us 80. And then we're left with nothing, so we can stop. So our final answer is 0.5625 or 5,625 10,000ths. Next one, 16/5. There's a lot of different ways we can do this one. I'll show you the first way is 5 is a factor of 100. So I can easily get the denominator to be 100 by multiplying by 20. What I do to the denominator, I must also do to the numerator to get an equivalent fraction. So 5 times 20 will give me 100. And 16 times 20, 16 times 2 is 32. So since it's 20, it'll be 320. Okay, now be careful when you read this one. 320 hundredths. Okay, 320 hundredths. This number is going to be over 100, over 1. So 320 hundredths, since a hundredths is only supposed to be 2 digits, if I have hundreds of hundreds, that's going to be wholes. So 320 hundredths is how you would write that. Now if that's confusing, you can always turn this into a mixed number. How many times does 100 go in evenly to 320? That would be 3 times, and you're left with 20. So 3 and 20 hundredths. And again, that right is what I have written right here, 3 and 20 hundredths. And we know we can just leave it as 3.2 because that 0 is unnecessary. A couple other ways you could do it is to turn it into a mixed number first. So how many times does 5 go into 16 evenly? And that's 3 times. And you're left with 1/5. And then we can again multiply by 20 to get that to be an equivalent fraction with 100 in the denominator. So 5 times 20 would give us 100, and 1 times 20 would give us 20. And then we can have our final answer here. Or you could have divided 1 divided by 5 using long division, or divided 16 divided by 5 using long division. I will show you dividing 16 divided by 5 with long division. So since my numerator is bigger than my denominator, I do expect it to be over 1, or at least 1. So 5 goes into 16 3 times. So minus 15 give me 1. Now I'm into the decimals. Bring down my 0. 5 goes into 10 twice. And it's 0, so I can stop. So 3.2. And again, we could have just done 1 divided by 5. So there's lots of different ways you can do number 5. But your final answer is 3.2. Okay, for number 6, 3 hundredths. So the denominator for this fraction is already 100. So this one's really easy to convert to a decimal. It's just 3 hundredths. So that's 0.03 because the 3, we have to be at least to the hundredths place because we have hundreds, so it's 3 hundredths. If you wanted to, you could do long division still, and it doesn't take that long actually. So 100 goes into 3 0 times, which makes sense. So we have our decimal, put our 0. 100 doesn't go into 30 either, so we put another 0, add another 0. How many times does 100 go into 300? 3 times. Subtract 300, and we get 0. And you can see we get that same answer. Moving on to number 7, 2 and 7/12. Another problem where we have a whole number part. So we know that our final answer is going to be 2 point something, so we can just deal with the 7/12. Unfortunately, 12 is not a factor of 100, so we can't multiply by something to get the denominator to be 100, so we're going to have to use long division. So 12 does not go into 7, so 0, now we're into the decimals. 12 goes into 70. We should know that 12 times 5 is 60, and so getting one more 12 in there is not possible. So it's going to go in 5 times, give us 60. And if you didn't know that off the top of your head, you need to just do some multiplication off to the side or adding 12s together to try to get 12 into 70 as many times as you can. So we're left over with 10. If before you drop another 0, you see that this number goes into this number, then you didn't divide this into that number as many times as you could have. So be careful with that. So drop a 0. Now, how many times does 12 go into 100? Well, I knew that 12 times 5 was 60, so let's just keep adding 12 to 60 here. So 12 plus 6, or 60 plus 12 would get us up to 72. Add another 12 would get us up to 84. Add another 12 would get us up to 96. So I know I'll get in there 96. So let's count how many that was. That was 5 12s, 6 12s, 7, 8 12s. And we have a remainder of 4, so we'll bring down a 0. I'm going to come up here. So how many times does 12 go into 40 evenly? It should be 3 times. 3 times 12 gives us 36. And we have 4 left over. Bring down a 0. How many times does 12 go into 40? 3 times. 3 times 12 is 36. Get 4. So you should notice that we're going to keep doing 36 and then get a 4 and then look at 40, then 36, be left with 4 looking at 40. So we can tell that the digit 3 repeats. Even though we just now noticed it, okay, we can put the repeating bar over the first 3 that we had. You don't need to keep this 3 and then put the repeating bar over this 3. So we don't need this 3, we can just put the repeating bar over the first 3. So our answer, remember we have the 2 because that was our whole number part, and we just ignored it when we were dividing because we know what's going to happen. It's going to be a 2 here. So it's going to be 2.58, and then the 3 is repeating. Now if you put something like 2.5833 and then the repeating, it's not wrong, but it's not considered simplest form because that's unnecessary. We can just put 1 3 with a bar over it since it repeats. Okay, number 8, 14/15. So again, 15 is not a multiple of 100, so we're not a factor of 100, so we're not going to be able to just multiply for this one. So we have to use long division. 14 divided by 15. 15 does not go into 14, so we have to go into the decimals. Now, an easy way to think about this is if we multiplied 15 times 10, we know would be too much. So if we take 1 away from that, let's try it 15 times 9. So if 15 times 10 is 150, that's too much. So we're going to take away 15. So we put 15 in there one less time and see how much that is. So you should know that you can do some borrowing here if you need to. That's going to be 135. So 15 goes into 149 times. That gets us up to 135, and we're left over with 5. Bring down a 0. 15 into 50. 15 plus 15 is 30, plus another 15 is 45. Think of time. 45 minutes is 3 minutes. So that's 3 times, and so we'll take off 45, and we're left with 5. Bring down another 0. How many times does 15 go into 50? Well, we just said it was 3 times. So that gets us up to 45. So subtract, we're left over with 5. And you should see that now we've got a repeating pattern. We're always going to have 5, then looking at 50, take away 45. Get 5, looking at 50, take away 45. So it's going to continue. So the 3 repeats here as well. Just like this last case, it is unnecessary to keep this 3 and then put a 3 repeating bar over this 3. We don't need this 3 now that we see that the pattern has happened. And we can just write that that first 3 starts to repeat. So 0.93 repeating, and 0.9, and then 3 repeating is your answer. The 9 does not repeat, so you do not put the bar over the 9. And over here, only the 3 repeated, so the 5, 8 does not have a bar over it either. So only put the bar over the digits that actually repeat. Next one is 7/8. Again, 8 is not a factor of 100, so this one cannot be done by multiplying, so we're going to divide using long division. 8 does not go into 7, which makes sense. Bring a 0. How many times does 8 go into 72? We know that 8 times 8 is 64. So that gets us up to 64, and we're left over with 6. So bring down another 0. We just said 8 times 8 is 64, so we can't get in 8 times. We can get it in there 7 times. So 8 times 7 is 56. And we're left over with 4. Bring down another 0, and 8 goes into 40 evenly. Goes in 5 times. So that zeroes out, and we're done dividing. So 0.875, or 875 thousandths, is our answer for 7/8. Another way you could have looked at it is, if you look up here, we know that 1/8 is equal to 0.125. So 7/8, we know that 1/8 plus 7/8 would give us a whole. So we could have just taken 1 minus 0.125, and that would have given us a 0.875. Number 10, 9/50. This one is going to be nice to us because 50 is a factor of 100. So I can get that to be 100 really easily. Multiply by 2 to both the numerator and the denominator to get an equivalent fraction. So 50 times 2 gives us 100, and 9 times 2 gives us 18. So 18 hundredths is our answer, and just write that as a decimal, 18 hundredths. If you wanted to do long division, we could very easily. 50 does not go into 9, which makes sense. So we put our decimals, and now see how many times 15 goes into 90. Well, we know, or 50 goes into 90. And we know it doesn't go in twice, it will only go in once. So minus 50 will give us 40. Bring down another 0. And now we're looking at how many times 50 goes into 400. And we can see if we ignore that 1 0 on each of them, we're looking at how many times does 5 go into 40, really. And that's 8 times. So 8 times 50 is exactly 400. And then we can stop dividing. And we get the same answer, 0.18, or 18 hundredths. Number 11, we have 10 and 7/9. So since we have a whole number part, we know that our answer is going to be 10 point something. And look, we have a 9 in the denominator. Remember that anytime you have a 9, 99, 999 in the denominator, that means whatever's in the numerator is going to repeat in the decimal. So if you know that, this one's really easy. 9's in the denominator, that's 1 digit of 9, so the 1 digit in the numerator is going to repeat. So it's going to be 0.7 repeating. So our final answer will be 10.7 repeating. Now, if you were unsure or you just didn't know that, it doesn't matter because we can still do long division and get the same answer. So if we do 7 divided by 9, I know that 9 does not go into 7. So we look at 70. 9 goes into 70 7 times because 9 times 7 gives us 63. Then we're left over with 7. Bring down our 0. We're asking ourselves the same question. How many times does 9 go into 70? 7 times. Subtract 73 or 63. You get 7. and then we'll look at 70 again. So it keeps going and going. So we can see that the 7 does repeat. So 7/9 is 0.7 repeating. So 10 and 7/9 would be 10 and 0.7 repeating. So that's it for number 11. The last one, number 12, has 2 digits of 9 in the denominator. So again, that means something's repeating. So since there's 2 digits of 9 in the denominator, whatever is in the numerator is going to repeat. And it's going to be 2 digits. So 20 is a two-digit number. So those are the 2 digits that repeat. So it's just 0.20 repeating. So it's going to be 20202020. Again, we can easily do this using long division if you didn't know that or you were unsure. So I know that 99 does not go into 20, so we're into the decimals. And now we're looking at 200. 99 will go into 200 twice. This is almost 100, so we know that 100 times 2 would give us 200. Since it's 1 less twice, it'll be 2 less than 200, so it'll be 198. And we're left with 2. Now, be careful. Now we're left with 2. Now we drop down 1 0. And so we have to ask ourselves at this point, how many times does 99 go into 20? Because I just dropped my 0. Well, it doesn't. So I put a 0. And now I have to drop a second 0. How many times does 99 go into 200? Well, it's 2 again. And we subtract 198. We're left with 2. Drop the 0 before you ask the question again. But we do have to ask now, how many times does 99 go into 20? It doesn't. 0. Then I drop another 0, and that same pattern is going to happen. It's going to be going twice, then none, then twice, then none. So that gives us our 0.20 repeating. So that's it for this worksheet. If you need more help with this, I can always give you some more problems. Be sure to sign up for a tutorial if you want to come in person and work on any of these with me. Thanks.